family secrets, betrayals, an inheritance that was supposed to mend old wounds, but only tore them deeper. Welcome, dear listeners, to a story soaked in envy and heartbreak. It all began on a hot summer's day in Atlanta, where an elegant black stepmother, who paid for almost everything in the family, found herself uninvited to the wealth she helped build. When the will was finally read, the revelation stunned everyone. Especially her. What happened next was a chain of events that exposed the family's darkest corners, turning love into greed and vengeance. And just when they thought they had seen it all, karma came knocking from the moment Nadine Jenkins laid eyes on Joseph Carter. She felt a sudden hush in her chaotic life, a hush that told her she'd found something real. Nadine was a successful event planner in Atlanta, known for her razor-sharp instincts and charm that could soften the hardest hearts. Joseph Carter, on the other hand, was the quietly confident businessman who ran Carter & Mabel, a boutique financial consulting firm. He was 50 years old, widowed for nearly 3 years, living in a sprawling home in Buckhead Tall, and soft-spoken. Joseph exuded a steady calm that drew Nadine like a magnet. Nadine was originally from Memphis, Tennessee. She had clawed her way up the social and financial ladder all on her own. No family money, no fancy alumni networks. She paid her way through college at Howard University by juggling multiple side hustles. After graduation, she moved to Atlanta, a city she had always considered a hub of black excellence, to start her event planning business. Within 4 years, she had become the go-to organizer for high-end weddings, charity galas, and corporate launches. She had ambition and grit qualities that shone through her every move. Joseph was older, more reserved, but with a warm sophistication that enchanted Nadine from their very first coffee date at Starbucks on Peachtree Road. Their chemistry was undeniable. Joseph's late wife, Selena, had passed from a sudden illness. He had spent years grieving, quietly focusing on raising his 2 daughters, Whitney and Desiree. Meeting Nadine felt to him like stepping into fresh air after a long, suffocating storm. Although Joseph's daughters were initially cautious, especially Whitney, the older sister who was suspicious by nature, Joseph's happiness with Nadine was clear to anyone who saw them together. Despite the differences in their backgrounds, Nadine and Joseph found common ground in their devotion to hard work, philanthropy, and family. While Joseph supported local charities like the Atlanta Mission, Nadine donated her time and skills to organize fundraisers at the High Museum of Art. When they finally decided to get married, Joseph's daughters wore polite smiles. Desiree, the younger one, seemed genuinely happy for her father, but Whitney's tight-lipped expression spoke volumes. Still, the wedding proceeded elegantly at the Fox Theatre. The union sealed in front of an intimate circle of friends and colleagues. Moving into the Carter family home was both exhilarating and intimidating for Nadine. The house, perched on a quiet, tree-lined street, had more rooms than she could count. A manicured lawn wrapped around a spacious patio, and the interior sparkled with tasteful, if not somewhat conservative, decor. Joseph's daughters had grown up in this home. Whitney was 24, newly graduated from a top college with a degree in marketing. Desiree, only a year younger, was studying interior design at SCAD Atlanta. They each had their own suite, complete with walk-in closets and private bathrooms. Though Nadine was only in her mid-30s, stepping into the role of stepmother to 2 grown daughters felt tricky. She bent over backward, trying to win them over. She bought groceries, updated their wardrobes with designer pieces from Nordstrom, and even paid for some of their college expenses when Joseph found himself between client contracts. It wasn't that Joseph expected her to foot the bills. Nadine volunteered, wanting to ease his burden. But some days, particularly on quiet evenings, when the family gathered around the dinner table, Nadine sensed invisible walls. Whitney would mention Mum in wistful tones, casting a somber glow across the conversation. Desiree would look away, half sad, half conflicted. Nadine understood she could never replace Selina, and she never tried. Still, she wished the girls would see her as part of the family, not a rival to their mother's memory. When financial stresses flared up, Carter and Mabel occasionally saw dips in revenue. Nadine stepped in without hesitation. Her event-planning gigs often raked in substantial profits. She thought helping Joseph cover a mortgage payment here or a school fee there was what a supportive spouse did. It soon became commonplace for her to pull out her checkbook. "Are you sure?" Joseph would ask, concern in his eyes. "Of course," Nadine always replied. "We're family now." Yet Whitney's skepticism lingered. In hushed tones, Nadine once overheard Whitney telling Desiree that Nadine was buying their father, or that she was manipulating him for something bigger. It stung, but Nadine pressed on with kindness. No matter what she did, though, Whitney's guard remained firmly in place. The subtle tension in the household grew. Whitney often made snide remarks when Nadine wasn't in the room. Little barbs about outsiders, or how their father had barely mourned Selina before jumping into another marriage. While Joseph tried to mediate, Whitney found ways to undermine Nadine's role in the family, sometimes through passive aggression, other times by being outright cold. Joseph wasn't blind. He recognized that money had become a crutch. Nadine was the primary spender, the stabilizing force who paid for emergencies and indulgences alike. Despite her generosity, Joseph felt a quiet shame that he, the father of the household, was leaning too heavily on his wife. He'd built Carter and Mabel from the ground up, but the market had become unpredictable, and some old clients had left for bigger firms. So he appreciated Nadine, even if it made him feel uneasy to accept so much financial support from her. Desiree, caught in the middle, showed more warmth toward Nadine than Whitney did. She would thank Nadine for the new MacBook or for paying her semester's tuition, yet there was always a slight hesitation, as if Desiree didn't want to pick sides in a battle that was intensifying each day. During family gatherings like Thanksgiving, when Joseph's relatives came over, Nadine noticed how people asked her questions politely, but rarely delved too deeply into how she was feeling. They were more eager to discuss her recipes or the table settings she meticulously arranged. Subtly, she felt she was still considered an interloper, a well-meaning outsider, but not one of them to cope. Nadine buried herself in her work. She won high-profile contracts, designed lavish corporate galas, and even planned a big charity event at the Georgia Aquarium. She was proud of her accomplishments, but success felt hollow when she couldn't even share it with her own stepdaughters. The tension with Whitney weighed heavily on her heart. One night, after a particularly heated exchange with Whitney, Nadine confided in her best friend, Simone, over dinner at the Optimist. Simone listened attentively as Nadine spilled her worries. Simone was the pragmatic type who always called things as she saw them. She cautioned Nadine that she might be giving too much without setting clear boundaries. Nadine shrugged off the warning. She believed love had no boundaries. But deep down, she feared Simone was right. Time passed, and Joseph felt an urgent need to unite his family. He arranged a short vacation to Orlando, inviting everyone to stay at an upscale villa near Walt Disney World. Joseph hoped shared fun and laughter might patch up any cracks Nadine, ever the planner, booked. Everything, plane tickets, theme park passes, even a private chef for a special dinner. She footed the bill in Orlando. The first few days seemed promising. They rode roller coasters together, screamed on Splash Mountain, and took photos with Mickey Mouse. Nadine made a point of giving Whitney and Desiree space with their father, but also tried to share in their joys. For a moment, it appeared that the closeness Joseph longed for could become a reality. Yet on the final day, tensions flared again. Whitney wanted to eat at a particular restaurant outside the parks, a fancy steakhouse. Nadine had already reserved a table somewhere else, a place known for its unique international cuisine. Whitney flew into a rage, seeing Nadine's plan as an attempt to overshadow her preferences. Voices rose, tearful accusations flew, and Desiree watched helplessly. That night alone, in the villa's elegantly furnished master suite, Nadine cried, while Joseph tried to comfort her. She told him the stark truth. "Your daughter hates me. I've done everything I can, Joseph. I'm paying for her schooling, her clothes, her dream vacations, and it's never enough." Joseph sighed and held her tight. He had no easy words. In his heart, he felt guilty for not quelling Whitney's resentments sooner. They promised to tackle the problem together when they returned to Atlanta. But little did they know, the seeds of deeper conflict had already been planted. Back in Atlanta, life returned to a tense normal. Joseph worked at Carter and Mabel, Nadine secured more event contracts, and the two daughters resumed their usual routines. Whitney in her new marketing job, Desiree at SCAD. The silent hostility between Whitney and Nadine persisted. Joseph tried to mediate by suggesting family therapy, but Whitney refused, outright claiming she wasn't the one with a problem. One fateful day while Joseph was at the office, Whitney accused Nadine of controlling the household with her money. Nadine was in the kitchen making a snack for Desiree when Whitney sauntered in, eyes blazing. "You think we don't notice how you throw your money around?" Whitney spat. "Dad was never broke before you came along." Nadine froze, trying to maintain composure. "Whitney, I only help because your father's workload has shifted. It's no secret that business can be unpredictable." "Oh, please," Whitney retorted. "You're just trying to upstage everyone. You want Dad to depend on you so you can keep him under your thumb." Desiree walked in, saw the confrontation, and tried to calm Whitney down. "That's not fair, sis. Nadine's done a lot for us. If anything, it's Dad who shut it." "Desiree," Whitney hissed, "she's not even our real mother. And here she is paying for everything, like it's some big philanthropic stunt." Nadine's lips quivered, but she refused to engage in a screaming match. "I love your father. I love this family. I'm not trying to replace your mother," she said softly. "If my help is hurting you, I'll stop." It was a dramatic moment, the tears streaming down Nadine's face. Whitney storming off, and Desiree left torn between the two. That night, Nadine found Joseph in his study and told him the truth. "I think I need to step back, financially. It's creating more tension." Joseph agreed but asked for a bit more time. "Let me finalize a major contract at Carter and Mabel," he said, eyes weary. "I'll make this right, true to his word." Joseph landed a substantial contract with a new client, Harrington Holdings. It was a lucrative opportunity that promised to bring Carter and Mabel back on track. Joseph was overjoyed seeing it as his chance to lighten Nadine's financial load and placate Whitney's suspicions. However, after a few months, rumors surfaced in Atlanta's financial circles that Harrington Holdings was on shaky ground, embroiled in potential fraud. Their CEO, Alan Harrington, was under investigation. By the SEC panicked. Joseph realized the contract he'd pinned all his hopes on might implode. If Harrington Holdings collapsed, Carter and Mabel would lose not only a major client, but also face serious reputational damage. As the crisis unfolded, Joseph found himself in a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, accountants, and risk managers trying to salvage the deal. He came home late every night, exhausted and tense. Nadine watched helplessly, her heart aching for him. She had her own busy schedule, planning an extravagant holiday gala at the Georgia Aquarium, but she dropped everything to support Joseph whenever he needed it. One evening, Desiree woke Nadine from a nap on the living room couch. "Dad's in trouble," she murmured, eyes rimmed with tears. She'd overheard her father talking to a lawyer on the phone. He might lose a fortune if Harrington goes under. Nadine stood up alarmed and rushed to find Joseph in his study. Joseph was pale, leaning over his mahogany desk stacked with financial statements. "Harrington's funds are frozen," he said shakily. "We've invested so much time and money. If they default, we're looking at lawsuits, layoffs. I'm not sure we can survive this hit." Nadine's heart sank. She knew what was coming next, and part of her dreaded it. "How much do you need?" "Joseph," she asked quietly. He didn't want to say. He didn't want to ask, but the weight of the situation forced him to speak. "A lot, Nadine. More than I'd ever feel comfortable borrowing from you." That night, while Whitney was out with friends, and Desiree locked in her room, studying Nadine, and Joseph hashed out a plan. She had substantial savings and a line of credit from her successful business. If Carter and Mabel could be propped up just until this crisis resolved, maybe they could avert disaster. Nadine believed in Joseph's abilities. She'd watched him navigate smaller crises before. It was a difficult decision, but Nadine agreed to invest heavily in Carter and Mabel. She wrote a large check, effectively saving Joseph's company from immediate collapse. She believed that despite the friction with Whitney, preserving the business would benefit the entire family. Surprisingly, Nadine's intervention worked, at least for the time being. Carter and Mabel avoided laying off staff, and Joseph managed to pivot to another client as a backup. The immediate crisis receded, like a storm passing over. For a brief period, the atmosphere at home lightened. Whitney kept her distance, perhaps out of pride or embarrassment that her father now owed his professional survival to Nadine Desiree. Meanwhile, displayed cautious optimism. She began taking an interest in Nadine's event, planning, sometimes tagging along to glamorous venues and offering design input. Meanwhile, Nadine's business soared. She landed more high-profile contracts, planned a trendy new hotel launch in Midtown, and even secured a year-long deal with a major software company to handle their corporate functions. Her profits surged, but with that, success came more sleepless nights, more stress. She was effectively shouldering two households, her personal life and her business empire. Occasionally, she found herself lamenting how lonely success felt when one's own family couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge it fully. To try and bridge the gap, Nadine organized an intimate dinner at home, hiring a private chef who specialized in Southern fusion cuisine. On a balmy Friday evening, she welcomed Joseph's close associates, a few of her event planning colleagues, and even one or two of Whitney's friends, hoping that a communal celebration would weave the family closer together. That night, the house hummed with laughter and conversation. The aroma of Cajun-spiced shrimp and creamy grits filled the air. Soft jazz music drifted from the sound system. For a fleeting hour, Nadine saw a semblance of the family life she'd always dreamed of. Whitney mingled with her friends, occasionally offering Nadine guarded compliments on the decor. Desiree gushed about the custom-designed centerpieces Joseph wore, a broad smile relief etched in every line of his face. Yet beneath the surface, Nadine sensed a stirring discontent, a faint but persistent undercurrent she could not quite pinpoint. It would not reveal itself fully until a far more devastating moment. Only weeks after that peaceful dinner tragedy struck. Joseph died suddenly of a massive heart attack. It happened on a Monday morning while he was at the Carter and Mabel office. Paramedics arrived too late. Nadine got the phone call from one of Joseph's employees. She collapsed, sobbing, unable to comprehend that the man she had built her life around was simply gone. When Nadine arrived at the hospital, Desiree and Whitney were already there. Desiree ran into Nadine's arms, tears streaming down her cheeks. Whitney stood to the side, her expression unreadable. It was as if the tension that had defined their relationship had been eclipsed by a grief so profound, words failed to capture it. The days following Joseph's death blurred into a fog of funeral arrangements, condolence visits, and endless paperwork. Nadine spared no expense to honor Joseph's memory, organizing a grand yet heartfelt funeral service. Hundreds of people attended, from Carter and Mabel employees to Nadine's own business contacts. Whitney and Desiree gave tearful eulogies, praising their father's strength and kindness. Nadine spoke last, describing Joseph's unwavering support, how he taught her to believe in second chances, how he was the love of her life. The entire congregation wept. Amidst the shock and sorrow, practical matters loomed Joseph had left behind: assets, shares in Carter and Mabel, and a large house, but also debts from his faltering business ventures. Knowing they needed to sort through these tangled threads, the family scheduled a meeting with Joseph's longtime attorney, Victor Olson, to read the will. On a gloomy Friday afternoon, Nadine, Whitney, and Desiree gathered in a stately conference room at Olson and Bradley, a venerable law firm downtown. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, and the large windows overlooked the bustling streets of Midtown Atlanta. Nadine felt her heart pound as they all took their seats around a polished oak table. She glanced at Whitney, who refused to meet her gaze, and at Desiree, who looked nervous, tapping her pen on a notepad. Victor Olson, a grey-haired attorney with a measured voice, began the reading. He recapped Joseph's intentions to leave his home, personal effects, and the majority of his estate to his daughters, Whitney and Desiree. The shares of Carter and Mabel would be split equally between them. Then came the matter of Nadine, Joseph's wife. Nadine leaned forward, expecting that Joseph at the very least would have mentioned her. But as Victor continued, a hollow chill spread through Nadine's limbs. The will had been written years before. Joseph met her and never updated. There was no mention of Nadine, no property, no money, not even a token of acknowledgement. She was, in the eyes of the law, effectively excluded from Joseph's estate. Desiree's eyes widened in shock. Whitney's expression was a tangle of suppressed emotion. Surprise, satisfaction, guilt. Nadine tried to breathe to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Her mind raced. All those times Joseph had promised to formalize his intentions. They had discussed rewriting the will numerous times, but never found the right moment, always pushing it to another day. Now that day would never come. As if compelled by a sense of duty, Victor Olson quietly explained that legally, Nadine might have certain claims as a surviving spouse, especially in Georgia, but those claims could be contested, particularly if she didn't fight for them. Whitney stared at Nadine with an inscrutable look. Desiree, tears in her eyes, reached over to touch Nadine's arm. But Nadine pulled away. Too numb to accept even comfort, she had poured her finances into this family, paid for college, supported Joseph's business, saved Carter and Mabel from collapse, and now she was left with nothing but heartbreak. The news of the will reading spread like wildfire among relatives and family friends. Some people were scandalized, calling Joseph short-sighted for not updating his will. Others insisted it was simply an oversight. Yet behind the scenes, Nadine sensed the worst. Whitney might view this as divine justice retribution for everything she perceived Nadine had done to wedge herself into the family. Meanwhile, real-world ramifications began to bite, with Joseph gone, and the will placing everything in the daughter's hands. Carter and Mabel was effectively under new ownership. Whitney and Desiree each owned half. Whitney, with her business degree, decided she would take a more active role in day-to-day management, even though she lacked real experience. Desiree, not particularly business-minded, was content to let her sister lead. Nadine was left to figure out her own legal position. Simone, her best friend, urged her to hire her own lawyer to fight for her rights as Joseph's spouse. "This isn't just about money," Simone argued. "It's about the principle. You put so much into this family. Your time, your energy, your finances." But Nadine hesitated. She remembered the love she and Joseph shared, how she had never wanted to turn their marriage into a transactional arrangement. Despite the heartbreak, a part of her clung to the memory of Joseph's voice, his promises, his gentle reassurances that they would sort the will thing out soon. Days turned into weeks. Nadine's finances were still strong from her event planning work, so she wasn't in immediate crisis. But she no longer felt comfortable in the Carter home, a place that was now legally Whitney and Desiree's. The tension became unbearable. One evening, Whitney demanded Nadine leave. "If you want to try your luck in court, do it from a hotel. This is our house." Desiree looked conflicted, but said nothing. She quietly handed Nadine a box of her belongings, as if apologizing. Crushed Nadine packed her bags and checked into a nearby hotel, planning her next moves in solitude. Although Whitney had effectively kicked Nadine out, she didn't realize how severely her own life would be affected by her father's death and the new responsibilities. Holding half the shares of Carter and Mabel was more than a badge of honor. It was a weighty obligation. Whitney soon discovered the day-to-day complexities of running a small financial firm. She also discovered that the debt from the Harrington fiasco hadn't miraculously vanished with Joseph's passing. The company still faced significant financial stress, and now, without Joseph's guidance or Nadine's steady injections of money, it was floundering. Desiree, buried in her final projects for SCAD, tried to help in small ways. She offered to redesign the firm's reception area or propose a marketing overhaul, but Whitney snapped at her for meddling. Cracks formed between the sisters, both weighed down by the business problems they barely understood. At first, Whitney was too proud to ask Nadine for help, but as weeks turned to months, the firm's finances deteriorated. Clients started jumping ship, uncertain of Carter and Mabel's future. Some vendors demanded immediate payment. The staff grew demoralized, whispering about the firm's downfall. Whitney cut corners wherever she could, even delaying paychecks at times, earning the ire of employees. Between her new CEO-like role at Carter and Mabel and her personal bitterness toward Nadine, Whitney found herself isolated. She had no one to turn to but Desiree. And Desiree was busy finishing her degree. Their relationship crumbled further when Desiree learned that Whitney had all but evicted Nadine, an act Desiree found heartless. Tensions soared. Meanwhile, Nadine, though still deeply wounded, returned to her event planning work with renewed vigor. She took on bigger contracts, traveling to New York, Los Angeles, and even London. Her business thrived, and she built a reputation that extended far beyond Atlanta. Yet in quiet moments, she felt the ache of betrayal, a sense that her love and generosity had been trampled by the very people she had tried to help. One late evening, Desiree showed up unannounced at Nadine's new condo, an upscale unit in Midtown that Nadine had hastily purchased for herself after months in a hotel. Desiree stood at the door with tears in her eyes. Nadine, though still hurt, invited her in, offering a warm hug. "I'm sorry," Desiree began, sobbing. I couldn't stop Whitney from kicking you out. I felt so guilty. And now the firm is struggling. Whitney can't manage everything alone. She won't admit it, but we're in big trouble." Nadine ushered her to the sofa and brewed some chamomile tea. "I never wanted to be your enemy," Nadine said gently. "You know that I loved your father, and I love you both." Desiree sighed, tears still glistening. "I believe you. I was just scared of losing another parental figure, I guess. But Whitney's so angry all the time, and we don't know how to fix Carter and Mabel. Dad always handled this stuff. We're not cut out for it." When Nadine asked about the will, Desiree revealed that they'd discovered more outstanding business debts than expected. "Everything is tied up. We can't even sell the house easily because it's collateral for a loan. We might have to file for bankruptcy if something doesn't change soon." A stirring of compassion welled up in Nadine. Despite her own pain, she'd known Joseph's finances were precarious, but she hadn't realized how desperate the situation had become. For a moment, she considered stepping in to help them again, but fear of being hurt once more held her back. "You know I'm here, if you really need me," Nadine finally said, "but I won't tolerate being disrespected or cut out again. I have to protect myself now." Desiree nodded, understanding. Meanwhile, Whitney was running on fumes. She stayed late at the Carter and Mabel office, poring over spreadsheets and trying to cut deals with clients. One afternoon, she discovered more troubling news. The firm was under investigation for improper handling of client funds under Joseph's watch. It wasn't that Joseph had done anything intentionally wrong. He had simply been too trusting, letting Harrington Holdings funnel questionable money through the firm. Now that Harrington was under intense scrutiny, the investigators were casting their net wide. She also learned that Joseph had personally guaranteed certain business loans with his own assets, including the family home. If the investigation led to fines, or if the firm defaulted, Whitney and Desiree could lose everything. Desperate, Whitney called an emergency meeting with Desiree, thinking they could brainstorm solutions. Desiree arrived looking weary, sitting in Joseph's old office, papers scattered around them. The sisters quarreled. Whitney blamed Desiree for not stepping up. Desiree accused Whitney of pushing Nadine away. The office's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the lines of worry etched on both sisters' faces. Eventually, Desiree mentioned her conversation with Nadine. "We have to ask for her help." She insisted, "She knows more about this than we do. We can't keep drowning." Whitney pounded her fist on the desk. "I'm not going to beg Nadine for another handout. We can figure this out ourselves." But as the days ticked by and the investigation intensified, it became clear that Carter and Mabel needed a financial lifeline, something neither Whitney nor Desiree could provide on their own. While the Carter sisters found themselves entangled in crisis after crisis, Nadine was experiencing the fruits of her own hard work. She had just come back from a 2-week contract in Dubai, where she planned a luxury wedding for the heir of an international shipping magnate. The pay was astronomical, adding to her already substantial nest egg, yet she couldn't shake the melancholy that often settled over her in quiet moments. She missed Joseph more than she could articulate. The grief still cut deep, especially at night when she'd stare at the empty side of the bed. The heartbreak of being excluded from Joseph's will and effectively ousted from the family haunted her. One afternoon, Nadine received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was shaky. Whitney. She spoke rapidly, her tone a mixture of desperation and forced pride. She explained the dire state of Carter and Mabel, the looming investigations, the potential bankruptcy. She asked Nadine to meet them, if not for the sake of old times, then for the memory of Joseph. Nadine hesitated, but finally agreed. A wave of conflicting emotions rushed through her: vindication, sympathy, lingering resentment, and a small flicker of hope that maybe this disaster could be a path to healing. They met at a quiet table in the corner of the Varsity in Midtown, an unpretentious setting compared to Nadine's usual upscale restaurants. The smell of fried food and the chatter of customers gave the meeting a surreal air. Whitney and Desiree looked tense, clasping disposable cups of soda. Nadine arrived in a crisp designer blazer, her posture poised, yet guarded. Whitney began by laying out the situation, the debts, the investigation, the personal guarantees. She admitted she was overwhelmed. Nadine listened patiently, arms crossed, letting Whitney talk until the words slowed to a stop. I need your help," Whitney finally said, tears threatening to spill. It was perhaps the first time Nadine had seen genuine vulnerability in her. "We can't do this without you. The employees are at risk. Dad's reputation is at risk, and we could lose the house." "Please, Desiree," eyes, already red, added, "We're sorry, Nadine, for everything. We treated you terribly. I know Dad would never have wanted this for us." A heavy silence ensued before Nadine spoke. "What exactly are you asking for?" "Another loan." "You do realize I'm not even legally part of this estate, right?" Whitney exhaled, her face flushed with shame. "I'm asking for your expertise. Maybe some financial support to keep the business afloat until we can fix what's broken. If there's any chance you could help manage or consult, we'll do whatever you say. We'll give you a formal position, a share of the business." Anything. Nadine's mind raced. She remembered how Joseph had built Carter and Mabel from scratch. His legacy didn't deserve to crumble. She thought of the employees who might lose their jobs, and she thought of her own battered heart. Part of her wanted to walk away, to let them face the consequences. But she wasn't raised that way. "I'll think about it," Nadine said firmly. "I'm not promising anything, but I won't abandon Joseph's memory to ruin." True to her word, Nadine consulted with her own lawyers and accountants. She discovered that bailing out Carter and Mabel would be a Herculean task. Significant capital would be required to pay down debts, cover legal fees, and restructure the firm. However, if executed properly, the firm could eventually return to profitability. After much deliberation, Nadine called for a meeting with Whitney and Desiree at her condo. They arrived looking anxious, each carrying piles of documents. Nadine poured them coffee and got straight to the point. "I'm prepared to invest the money needed to save Carter and Mabel, but I want full operational control until it's stable. I'll also take a majority stake to protect my interests and the employees' livelihoods." Whitney bristled clearly, not thrilled at losing control of her father's company. "But that means we'll be working for you." Nadine nodded calmly. "Yes. Think of it like bringing in an angel investor. And once the company is out of debt and profitable, we can renegotiate. But for now, this is non-negotiable. If you can't accept it, I walk away." Desiree stared at the floor, guilt etched into her features. She understood that Nadine was offering them the only lifeline they had left. "We accept," she said quietly, glancing at her sister. Whitney finally nodded, albeit reluctantly. Thus began a new chapter. Nadine took over as interim CEO of Carter and Mabel. She brought in her own financial advisors to tackle the ongoing investigation. She leveraged her extensive network to drum up new clients. She restructured the firm's staff, keeping the loyal employees but cutting redundant roles. It was a whirlwind of legal wrangling, marketing pushes, and policy overhauls. Nadine worked tirelessly, just like when she was scaling her event planning business. In the process of auditing Carter and Mabel's accounts, Nadine's team uncovered a disturbing piece of information. Joseph had known his old will was outdated, but for reasons unclear, he never got around to signing the new one that included Nadine. In his drafts, he allocated a significant portion of his estate to her, acknowledging her role in supporting him and the family. Unfortunately, the final will was never executed. It remained a digital file on Joseph's computer. When Nadine read the draft, tears rolled down her cheeks. Joseph had wanted to do right by her. He just never finished the job. She felt a bittersweet mixture of relief and heartbreak. She didn't share this with Whitney and Desiree, immediately unsure of how they'd react over the next several months. Under Nadine's leadership, Carter and Mabel steadily recovered. The SEC investigation concluded with a relatively minor penalty. Once it became clear Joseph had been unwittingly involved with Harrington Holdings, new reputable clients came aboard, lured by Nadine's shrewd negotiation skills and her reputation as a successful entrepreneur. Whitney and Desiree found themselves reporting to Nadine daily. Though Whitney initially chafed at the change in hierarchy, she began to respect Nadine's unflinching business acumen and calm leadership. Desiree, who had always been more open, blossomed in the new environment, spearheading marketing campaigns and learning the ropes of business operations. People around them whispered of karmic balance, that after so much animosity, the stepmother who was shut out had now become the savior of the very thing that threatened to ruin them. Amid the flurry of corporate revival, Nadine and the daughters started spending more time together, sometimes discussing strategy late into the evening, other times taking a breather in the office cafeteria. They reminisced about Joseph's favorite jokes, his most iconic habits, and the fatherly advice that used to exasperate them. Slowly walls began to crumble. One evening, Nadine worked late in her new office. Joseph's old office, when Whitney knocked on the door, her eyes red with tears. "I'm sorry," Whitney whispered. "I've treated you so horribly. I thought you were trying to replace Mom and manipulate Dad. But now I see you really cared for him. Cared for us. If Dad were here, he'd be furious at how I behaved." Nadine stood crossing to Whitney and embraced her. "I forgive you," she said, voice trembling. "We've all been through so much. Let's move forward together for Joseph." They cried, reconciling in a moment, charged with both regret and relief. Desiree, who had been in the hallway, joined them, hugging her sister and Nadine. It was the first time the three had shared a warm embrace, an unspoken promise of unity. With the business stabilized and relationships thawing, Nadine decided it was time to settle the question of Joseph's estate once and for all. She presented the daughters with the draft Will Joseph had never signed. Whitney was stunned. Desiree burst into tears. They immediately recognized their father's handwriting. The personal touches, he added the references to memories only the three of them shared. "We never knew," Desiree managed to say, wiping her eyes. "Dad did want to provide for you." Whitney looked profoundly remorseful. "And we robbed you of that by insisting on using the old will. I don't know how to fix this." Nadine assured them she wasn't seeking revenge. "It's not about the money anymore," she said, "but Joseph's intentions matter. We can't ignore what he wanted." They discussed possibilities with a new lawyer, one who specialized in probate and estate disputes. A lawsuit could be filed to argue that Joseph intended to change his will, though the unsigned document wasn't legally binding. Whitney and Desiree, feeling the weight of their guilt and longing to correct the record voluntarily, agreed to allocate a share of Joseph's assets to Nadine, enough to reflect what Joseph had wanted, if not the exact sum. Word spread quickly that Nadine was stepping in to rescue the family business and was also working with the daughters to ensure justice in Joseph's estate. Some extended relatives who had initially shunned Nadine now rushed forward with apologies and excuses. Many offered unsolicited opinions. "You should take them to court," or "You're so kind, Nadine. They don't deserve you." But Nadine didn't let the gossip affect her decisions. Karma, in its own way, had already done its work. The daughters had tasted the humiliation and desperation of nearly losing everything. They recognized that their cruelty toward Nadine had boomeranged back, forcing them to rely on her and see her true character. As for Nadine, she found a sense of closure in knowing Joseph had planned to protect her. She chose compassion over vengeance. The humility and remorse from Whitney and Desiree was genuine, and she accepted it as the closure she needed, with the estate affairs gradually resolving. Nadine, Whitney, and Desiree settled into a unique but functional family rhythm. Nadine officially became the majority shareholder of Carter and Mabel, but she restructured the agreement to ensure that each daughter maintained a stake in their father's legacy. She taught them business strategies, financial planning, and the art of negotiation. Slowly they evolved from adversaries to collaborators, and eventually something like a family. They sold the old house, too big, too expensive, too burdened with memories, and downsized to more practical living spaces. Nadine purchased a beautiful modern home in Midtown with a separate guest suite for the daughters. Whenever they visited, Whitney decided to move into a loft near Piedmont Park to have some independence. Desiree got a small apartment closer to SCAD and occasionally crashed at Nadine's house. Weekends found them visiting Joseph's grave together or sharing Sunday dinners at Nadine's place, sometimes joined by Simone or other mutual friends. They talked business, but they also laughed, teased one another, and celebrated small victories. Months turned to a year, and Nadine's heartache over Joseph's death never fully went away. She still felt pangs of sadness when she remembered their brief time as husband and wife, how she never got to share a long future with him, how the will fiasco had overshadowed their love. Yet she found solace in the new relationships she was forging with Whitney and Desiree. At times she would think of the old adage, "You reap what you sow." Whitney had sown suspicion and hostility, only to reap desperation and regret. Desiree, torn between loyalty and empathy, had reaped confusion and heartbreak. Nadine had sown generosity and love, reaping a different kind of fulfillment, even if it came through a winding path of pain. On a cool autumn evening, after a long day at Carter and Mabel, Nadine gazed at a photo of Joseph on her desk. In it, he wore that gentle smile she missed so much. She whispered a silent promise. "I'll take care of them. Joseph, I'll keep your legacy alive. I just wish we had more time." Under Nadine's leadership, Carter and Mabel underwent a major rebranding, renamed Carter Jenkins Consulting. To reflect the united front, Whitney grew into her role as Director of Client Relations, learning the finesse of forging partnerships and handling negotiations with more tact than ever before. Desiree, after graduating from ESCAD, applied her creative eye to the firm's marketing materials, web design, and even office aesthetics. Financially, the firm soared. The sisters came to appreciate Nadine, not just as a boss or stepmother, but as a mentor and friend. Whitney gradually shed her bitterness, recounting in a heartfelt conversation with Nadine how she felt she was betraying her mother's memory by accepting Nadine. Nadine assured her that love was never a betrayal. Selena's memory could coexist with a new family dynamic. Karma's final flourish appeared in how the family evolved. The stepmother, once maligned and ostracized, became the pillar that kept Joseph's legacy alive. The daughters who once wielded legal documents to evict her now recognized her as the glue that held them together. A year and a half after Joseph's passing, the three women visited his gravesite, placing flowers in front of the headstone. Nadine knelt down and traced his name, a tear escaping her eye. Whitney and Desiree stood on either side, each resting a hand on Nadine's shoulder. In that silent moment, they felt the strange tapestry of their shared history. Anger, grief, betrayal, forgiveness, unity. It was far from a storybook ending, but it was real, and it was theirs. Nadine stood, and the three headed back to the car. They had plans for dinner. A new tradition they had formed, Saturday nights at Nadine's midtown home, where they would share a meal, a glass of wine, and the stories of their week. Whitney often joked that Nadine should plan her future wedding someday. Desiree teased that they should get matching tattoos in memory of their father. Nadine smiled, letting the warmth of these familial moments soothe her lingering sorrow. They drove away from the cemetery, the city skyline glittering in the distance. Despite everything, they had emerged not as separate fragments of a shattered family, but as a nuanced whole, bound by Joseph's love and Nadine's unyielding capacity for grace. And there you have it, a family story that began with hostility and heartbreak, only to find redemption where few expected it. Nadine, the black stepmother, once ostracized and left with nothing, ended up becoming the backbone of her late husband's business and the unexpected hero of a fractured family. Whitney and Desiree, initially consumed by grief and suspicion, learned that sometimes the people we push away are the ones we need the most. When karma finally swept in, it didn't merely punish bad actions. It forced everyone to confront their deepest regrets and embrace a second chance. If this tale moved, you please give the video a like, share it with someone who loves a good redemption story, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories that explore the complexities of love, family, and life's biggest twists. Thank you for watching, and remember, true family is forged by more than blood.